You unlock this door with the key of compassion. Beyond it is another world, a world of science, a world of common sense, a world of sanity. You're moving into a land of both empathy and ethics, of nutritional knowledge and empowerment. You've just crossed over to Dr. Osborne's zone. Dr. Wolfson, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about, of all things, mold and mold toxicity.
Yeah, who would have thought when we started our careers, years and years and years ago, after all of our, medical training and health training for that matter, that we would eventually be talking about mold and how it's impacted us and impacting, I believe, everyone. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Yeah, can you walk us through what your story, what happened with you and your family around mold? Share that experience.
Yeah, it was interesting because, we had often talked about mold over the years, but kind of as one of these, top 10 or top 20 things that somebody would be impacted by. Never thought was going on with us. Not that it couldn't happen with us, but never really thought it was going on with us. And we were living in a house in Arizona. In 2018, it was a rental home. We moved into it for a couple years. And that was when my wife gave birth to our third child, our first daughter. And she had problems nursing. She had problems with tongue tie. She had problems with, gaining weight. And this was shocking to us because my wife is a chiropractic physician. She's all natural, eats all organic, took all the right, supposedly, prenatal supplements and stuff like that. And ultimately would have, give birth to this child with these kind of issues. So my wife, struggled to nurse, to breastfeed, and the first two she did so well with. And this one, again, struggling there. We did everything we could, talked to everybody we could, every supplement we could, enhance the breast milk production and really the child's ability to nurse well. So fast forward, my wife is sitting at the kitchen table. My wife's not feeling well. She's got a glutathione nebulizer in her mouth. She's got a breast pump in the other hand, trying to express more milk. And that's when she is sitting in the kitchen table and she looks at the kitchen sink and under there, the cabinetry, and she sees a stream of water coming from under the sink. And that's obviously startled her. She got up, she took a look under the cabinet and saw that there was significant water damage in that particular area. With that, she picked up and she left the house and she never went back into the house again. We did have a professional come in and there was mold under the kitchen counter top and under, and in the floor. And we never went back into that house ever again. And that really started us on our mold related journey.
Yeah, and at the time, seeing that water and getting out of that house, was there any other clues or insights? I mean, could you smell must? Was there any other insight that made you guys suspect it, or was it just that moment, like, aha, here it is, there's water?
We always thought the house had a little bit of a smell. And like you said, the must smell. And what is the smell of must? Well, the smell, there is nothing that is must, right? And the must describes the smell of water damage, mold, and or bacteria. So we understand that now. We look at some of the health issues we were having at the time. My second son with bloody noses, my oldest son with, wetting the bed. Were his issues. And then also our little girl, when she's around mold, she gets eczema is her main issue. So when you kind of look at it through all these things of like, oh, well, this is normal. It's normal for a kid to get bloody noses. Sometimes kids wet the bed. But now you start to put together the fact that really any symptom that anyone has, adult or child, can be related to mold mycotoxicity, which of course you already know. But, since 2018, and I know obviously from your personal experience now, it's like you become one of the worldwide experts on living in water damage. And as I speak to you right now in 2025, I am sitting outside of a restaurant in Sandpoint, Idaho, and we are currently tent camping, and we've been tent camping around the country for the last 6 months in vinyl tents in an effort to never live in water damage again. We are currently building a structure down in the mountains of Costa Rica out of concrete, steel, and glass. And then just like you guys have put together the barn-dominium is a wonderful, wonderful concept, right? Concrete, metal, and glass. And, that'll be our next adventure here in the state. We're not sure where we want to do it yet. Sandpoint, Idaho is a pretty fun place. We're having a good time up here.
So when you guys got out of mold, what did you notice the most? I mean, as far as health was concerned, eczema, you mentioned a child with eczema, one nosebleeds, all that went away.
Skin issues, gut issues, sleep issues, weight. If anything, my wife has really struggled to keep weight on, and clearly there is the majority of people who live in water damage have weight gain, have unexplained overweight, as opposed to underweight. But there's plenty who are underweight, and of course, all that can be, can impact the thyroid function, other hormonal functions. Everything impacts everything, but things definitely improve when we are out of mold. And then as we've kind of gone along over the years, is that actually the house we lived in Colorado back in 2021 to 23, that house did not have mold. We tested it for mold 6 ways from Sunday. And then we finally understood that actually it wasn't the mold, it was water damage bacteria, both gram-negative, gram-positive bacteria. The effects they have on the gut microbiome, disrupt the gut microbiome, leading to leaky gut, intestinal hyperpermeability, inflammation, ox stress, immune system activation, and then ultimately disease. And it's really been an epiphany moment for me as a physician, and I know you as well. It's kind of like, you cut your teeth, as far as I know, right, in the gluten world, and gluten definitely is a problem for a lot of people. But I think when I kind of came out in my natural heart doctor practice in 2012, it was kind of all about metals, all about gluten, and I think we've really morphed a lot. And that's the beauty of doing what we do, is that we have the ability to change. The medical doctor doesn't. The traditional cardiologist, I mean, they've got one tool in this toolbox, and that's all just the medical tools. For us on our side, it's really kind of coming to that realization of like, wow, this is a serious player. And gluten in and of itself, and lead and paint and all these things, they are not living, breathing organisms. Mold is, and so is bacteria, and it wants to survive. And because of that, it really just leads to so much sickness to so many people. Terrific.
So yeah, let's explore that bacteria that you're talking about. So you'd had your test, because some people get testing done for mold, and if you hire a standard mold inspector, really the main tool most of them are going to use is a simple air test, and they're going to measure, for mold spores, on a tripod 5 foot in the air. And you mentioned bacteria as being problematic in your home, and of course, bacteria being something that can also grow with water damage. You mentioned gram-negative bacteria specifically. Talk about how you determine that over mold. Like, what kinds of testing were you looking at doing that might help people who are watching this differentiate if they've had mold testing negative, but they still suspect their house might be contributing to their illness?
Well, I think there's you use real-time labs. When the mold mycotoxins are coming out of your urine, you have to keep digging. You cannot rely on someone coming in and giving you a negative set of tests. You don't feel well. Your blood, tests do not reflect health. Your urine test shows that there's toxins in there. Maybe even, again, like this, like a Swiffer test that would look for mold and bacteria. And you just have to keep, digging until they find it. And that's what I tell my patients, is that these are your abnormal results. Show it to the inspector, and they have to find it. And if they can't find it, they have to keep trying, or you have to find someone else who can. And you and I talked about this online or offline before we started recording, is that a lot of times it's not even a smoking gun of like a particular area that's the problem. It's just the entire fabric of the home is just soaked in water damage. All of the wood in the home, it could have and likely did come with water damage in there. And it could be living mold, it could be dead mold, it could be the mycotoxin from dead mold, maybe just as damaging. I kind of think about this, Doc, as far as, a dandelion. And if you take a yellow dandelion flower, you blow on it, and nothing's really going to happen. That's the living mold. But the dandelion that's already morphed into that, quote unquote, wisher phase, where you can now blow on it because now it's dead. And now it disperses everything in a very dangerous fashion. Now you have all these toxins, mycotoxins floating around the house, recirculating around the house. Some people experience symptoms. 4 out of 5 times it's the woman who experienced symptoms. 1 out of 5 times it's the man. The man's sitting there, and you've had a lot of consultations, like this, and like, oh, it's not, there's mold, there's nothing the matter with my house. And that's the guy who has a heart attack. That's the guy who's on 3 blood pressure pills. That's the guy who's got erectile dysfunction. He feels fine. But the woman's the canary in the coal mine, if you will. I guess that's kind of a long way to answer your question, is that, the bacteria, that's there. It's just, then you start looking for the water damage, and the gram-negative bacteria and the gram-positive bacteria, they disrupt the gut microbiome as well. Those toxins in there damage your own personal gut microbiome, influence your gut microbiome, again, leading to leaky gut, intestinal hyperpermeability. And then now, of course, you have things like undigested gluten particles, coming through. And of course, that leads to extreme sickness. The medical literature on the lipopolysaccharides and high levels of lipopolysaccharides from these gram-negative bacteria, or let's just say bacteria in general, just not to confuse anybody with how things look under a microscope. But these lipopolysaccharides are part of the bacteria, and they get into the body. They generate an immune response, developing anti-lipopolysaccharide antibodies, but all of that is linked to high levels of cardiovascular disease. It could be coming from your teeth. It could be coming from your gut. All those things you need to fix up, but you got to check the house for bacteria.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but water damage is not mold in a vacuum. You get bacteria that grows, you get mold that grows. The bacteria releases toxins. It can disrupt your microbiome. It can colonize your microbiome, and it can release its endotoxins, its LPS endotoxins, which can create a lot of downstream inflammatory manifestation. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's definitely fair to to say. The bacteria that's happening, what's going on there, again, are just as and maybe more so deleterious. I think you and I both understand that the medical literature is really so young on all of this, and there's so much room for debate in all these different areas because there's just not a lot that's really out there. There's a fair amount that's out there. I've been a medical expert on 2 mold cases over the last 12 months, and then the defense cardiologist, because one's a heart attack case, the other's a case of atrial fibrillation. So the defense cardiologist says, they'll get in some guy from like, Cornell or Yale or something like that, some high profile guy who's got all the credentials and is like, oh, well, there's no evidence that mold leads to cardiovascular disease, right? And then I come in with a stack of articles, about all the different ways that mold mycotoxins lead to cardiovascular disease. And then within a couple of weeks, the case settles because the cardiologist understands that they've got no defense and had no clue of that. And, again, the ignorance of the physicians is just the way that the medical doctors are trained. It's not anything personal. It's just something that we never get any form of training on in school, whatsoever.
Yeah, I know that, mold, years ago, there was an old saying, mold gold, where it was actually, I think it was a counter on purpose. It was like a propagandist campaign to say that mold really doesn't cause people's problems. They're just trying to find mold so they can charge a lot of people for remediation. And then insurance companies, of course, quit carrying mold policies on homes. And that was after a major lawsuit in Dallas, Melinda Boward's case. But to me, it's been a deterrent from that point on. It's been a deterrent for anybody to even open the field to have a conversation. I mean, I've seen well over 1,000 cases of mold toxicity where people either had to get out of their homes or have their homes remediated in order to restore their health. And it's really, to me, it's just kind of sad that at this day and age, we need more research, but we certainly have enough to start this conversation that this can be problematic. And too often, mainstream is just dismissing it all out.
Well, I think, to your point, I think I've read somewhere maybe that Shoemaker, who we'd have to say is the founding father of mold mycotoxicity and the damaging effects of mold, that he's estimated that upwards of 50% of houses have water damage. At this point, Dr. Peter, I'm going to say every house has water damage, certainly until proven otherwise. And it's just to what level, just the way that the houses are constructed, how that affects the individual, who knows, symptoms or not, how many people are walking around, oh, that guy ate super healthy, he exercised, he was out in the sun, he took his supplements, and then he dropped dead. And I think, again, we look at the really the whole umbrella of toxins, but I think mold and bacteria are at the top of it. And then if you'd say from a financial standpoint and an insurance standpoint, if we say that the majority of houses are water damaged, who's going to pay for that? If you look at Hurricane, Katrina, where literally every house in the state of Louisiana has water damage, from Hurricane Katrina or not. All the houses, everything in Florida, or just, the HVAC systems, just the humidity, let alone a leaky toilet, shower, sink, dishwasher, laundry machine, spills under a carpet, cars. How many cars are water damaged from spills that happen in there? Issues with the HVAC system of a car, the humidity of a car. It just, the gravitas of this is so huge. And what we offer really is the ability to get people to understand, hey, this is definitively your problem. The solution to it can be very difficult. Not everybody's going to pick up and move into a vinyl tent like my wife and I have with our 4 children. But we are very determined never to live in anything with water damage again. That's why we spend so much time outside. It's not easy, but it's an answer. It's an answer.
Yeah, I know a lot of people, which I think would struggle with that concept of just like picking up and moving, even just moving out of their house, even if it's into another house. I'm sure you've seen it, but I've seen cases where, it's like out of the fire or out of the pot into the fire, where they move from one home to another really quickly. They didn't do the diligence on, did that new home they were moving into have mold? Or they assumed that because the house was new, that there wasn't enough time. Because that's another assumption that people make, is that the house has to be old and has had to have a history of water damage for mold to proliferate. But it only takes 48 hours for the stuff to start growing. And a lot of people don't realize new construction is not all that great. We use cheap labor and cheap materials, and corners are cut. And oftentimes that's what leads to very quickly to mold growth. In my case, we had mold, in our brand new home. Within 2 years of being there, when we tapped the wall cavity and measured spore counts, we were in some cases over 1 million spore counts. But in most cases, the wall cavities were 50,000 plus in almost every wall cavity of the house. So the house was just generating mold, or just feeding mold, because it was improperly constructed from the get-go. And so moisture it couldn't control the moisture. And the moisture, it wasn't a running leak that led, in my case, it was just a moisture problem because of improper construction.
Yeah, I think that people, fail to realize that, for sure, in the sense that if you look at a new home, how it's constructed, obviously the vast, vast, vast majority of homes are made out of wood. They're made out of popsicle sticks. Those popsicle sticks, they arrive already moldy because of the way the popsicle sticks are made. Then they sit and they're put up and under construction. And what happens, whether you're in Houston, you're in Chicago, you're in New York, or you're in San Francisco, it rains on your home. The wood is water damaged again. And then you put it up into the drywall, you seal it in, you just create the perfect conditions for excess humidity in there. And now you've just got this total infestation of mold and bacteria into the home. And if someone has an old home, for 100% it has mold, no doubt. If someone has a brand new home, just to your point of like, it's it's certainly, we lived in Arizona, quote unquote, dry climate. But undoubtedly, the entire fabric of that home, Colorado, where we live, dry climate, just the entire fabric. I would sit there on my couch in Colorado and I would look at the neighbor's house under construction, and it would snow and then it would melt and then it would snow and then it would melt all over this guy's wood. California, notorious for that. The high humidity there on all those beach houses, California. You think about what happens with the California Palisades fire, and now you aerosolized all those homes, and now you put that into the atmosphere. You put it, down if you're living downstream from that. So not only did you burn up someone's mold box, but then all the plastics and phthalates and parabens and all the other contaminants of the home, and you're breathing that in this cloud of poison downstream from that. It's just horrific. One more thing I want to add on that too, and I know you talk about this, is that all of your belongings are contaminated. So all of your clothing, your high school yearbook, your wedding dress, whatever you're saying, it's all contaminated. It's all contaminated. And the best thing I think you can do is take all that stuff put it into storage, and maybe you'll come back sometime in the future to take a look at it if you need to. But all that stuff's contaminated. If you bring that into a new home, you are bringing in the old contaminants into the new. So even a lot of people say, yeah, I don't feel well in the new home. Yeah, certainly the new home can be contaminated, but you brought your stuff with it. Even people who move into, an RV, if you take your old clothing, your old belongings into the brand new RV, you're just going to cross-contaminate it, which just really highlights how difficult of a situation we're dealing with. And Peter, I talk to heart attack people, stroke people all day long. And you can imagine that you tell people, hey, you got to eat this way, you got to go to sleep, you got to get sunshine, you got to get out of all these toxins, you got to take all these expensive tests, take all these expensive supplements. And they're like, forget it. I'm just going to take a Lipitor, I'm just going to take my blood pressure drugs. I'm going to listen to the conventional doc. The problem is when you listen to the conventional docs, you're going to die. It's not either or. You're going to die their way. The average American average American male life expectancy is age 76. And the last 15 years plus of that are just in horrific health. Arthritic complaints, inflammatory issues, doctor visits, pharmacy visits. It's just monumentally catastrophic. It goes back to the Bible, where Moses talks about this 3,500 years ago in the book of Leviticus, what to do if your home has water damage. And what Moses says, if you can't fix it, you got to tear the whole place down. And they knew that 3,500 years ago, and people don't get it today.
Yeah, I found that it's interesting. A lot of times when you just look to the Bible, you could see that somebody has written about, the answer already, and it's very clear about mold. Every stone, every timber must be taken down and taken to the outside of town, right, away and buried in an unclean place. And that, a lot of people are just trying to hold on to it, understandably so. I think most people, their number one investment is their home, right? If you think about, and so like financially, it becomes a tremendous burden. In your experience helping people navigate mold, I'm sure you come across people where like budgetarily they're maybe stuck a little bit. What are some things that you give them or advise them to do, in those types of situations where maybe they can't pick up and move, or maybe they're just unwilling to pick up and move? But are there stopgaps that you recommend, or are there certain nutrients, or there certain treatments or protocols that you would have them do as a stopgap until they kind of make their mind up one way or the other?
Yeah, and believe me, just like you, we've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on our personal, experiences, trying to avoid mold and or bacteria. I've got countless stories about whether it's hotels, vacation rentals, getting rid of clothing, getting rid of cars. So yes, so we're coming from, and again, as I say this right now, with God as my witness, we live in a vinyl tent in Sandpoint, Idaho. We're going to make it south. We're going to continue to live in vinyl. We often change out the vinyl tents and the mattresses and all those things that we do. Okay, so what can we do if we still live in water damage? Well, I think that, really it's kind of twofold. Really threefold. Clean out the air the best that you can, air purification systems and things like that. But then support your body to the best that you can with the right food, the sunshine, the sleep, the physical activity, movement, chiropractic care, taking care of your teeth, all those basic tenets are undoubtedly going to help you combat the onslaught from these other environmental toxins. And then I think the binder aspect of, can we bind up some of these toxins so we don't reabsorb them, we poop them out the other side. So binders, I think, could be very beneficial here. Humic acid, fulvic acid, the bentonite clays, the charcoals, the organic psyllium husks, all these things have pluses and minuses to them. Sauna is a great way, sweating is a fantastic way to get rid of these mold mycotoxins. These are proven to be in sweat. Again, the data is still young on this, but it also makes common sense. So that'll be another factor. And I think also, that, again, just going back to the food story, we're really big into eating seafood, wild salmon, sardines, anchovies. We're big fans of wild salmon roe, so eating the fish eggs, all the nutrients that's in that. A lot of the mold mycotoxins cause such excess oxidative stress. So how do we repair the oxidative stress? Fix those cell membranes and things like that. And I think that's where the seafood really comes in like a superstar. The other is organ-based products. We sell a product which are unvaccinated bison organs from South Dakota, liver, heart, kidney, which are fantastic in that arena. And then, really just trying to, if your gut microbiome is being destroyed, how do you keep your gut microbiome healthy? And I think it's really all those similar tenets that we talk about where, give your body what it needs, take away what it doesn't, and that's going to be the strategy.
Yeah. Do you ever see people get better if they're still in it? Like how much does all that kind of thing move the needle for people in your experience?
I think for a lot of people, it undoubtedly improves them. I know you'll agree with this too, that we get concerned about all these other environmental toxins, and another big player is EMF. And a lot of people become extremely EMF sensitive, especially when they're living in the mold. And then as they, maybe do some of these other strategies, they deal with things better. But I don't think anybody really improves 100%, Peter, until they're out of the mold. And candidly, again, it could take a long time. Some people recover very quickly. Some people, there's such extensive damage from living a whole life in mold. I think back to, my father, I've told this story on your stage before at your event about my dying, but they give him the label of PSP, and simultaneously, serendipitously, God, intervened, put this young woman in front of my face, and she's a doctor of chiropractic, and she told me all the reasons why my father was sick and dying. And one thing we didn't really talk about a lot back then, Peter, in 2005, was the mold issue. And my father was born into mold. My father, like anybody was, my father lived in mold throughout his entire life. The house that we lived in the suburbs of Chicago, Illinois, I remember it flooded twice. It was a beautiful home. My father was a very successful cardiologist. We lived in a beautiful home that flooded twice. And maybe once they tore up the carpet or whatever they did, there was no mention whatsoever of mold related to that. But as I think about it now, right, the must smell, the must is mold, and the impact of that, with my father, the story that generated, with that, and then also, as the mold and the bacteria digest the components of the home, that releases all the different VOCs, the volatile organic compounds or chemicals that we breathe in that generates the smell. We're not smelling the mycotoxins, but we're smelling the VOCs, and that's a whole nother spectrum of really understanding. If your house smells, I mean, it's one final thing too, Peter. We went into we were down in Costa Rica, and we were up in the mountains, and we walked into this house considering it as an Airbnb. And my wife, again, didn't even want to go in the house. I'm like, come on, let's go in. Let's just take a look. We need somewhere to live, down here, temporarily. And we go into the house, and it smelled like curry. It smelled like somebody was cooking a whole bunch of Indian food in the house. And the person who was showing this in the house said, no one has been in the house for 6 weeks. And it smelled like curry, so it's like all those different smells, that are coming out, and it's just the mold and the bacteria that are digesting the home, that are releasing the VOCs. And it's really monumental. And I so appreciate you allowing me to share some of my stories and all this stuff for the listeners, because if you're sick in any way of anything, symptoms or not, any kind of, people talk about family history, well, your family members lived in mold, and so do you, and you're sick because of it.
Yeah, so you're more of the opinion that pretty much every home has a potential issue. How do people navigate that overwhelming thought and move forward?
Yeah, again, it's the diagnosis is kind of the easy part, it's like what to do with it. That's the difficult part. And I think a lot of people too, the doctors are all in denial. Why don't more people adopt this? Because the doctors would realize they live in a mold box as well, and now they have to deal with it. So that's going to be a definitive factor there, is really this whole denial, process. But, really just kind of accepting the fact that, yeah, the majority, if not all, the houses are water damaged. And now what are you going to do about it? Hopefully your spouse will be supportive. Hopefully your people around you will be supportive. A lot of people, especially these women, they're so brain fogged, they can't even concept what to do. I think another thing, Peter, too, hopefully, is that people like you and I, maybe we can get some investors with us. And how do we create really mold-free housing for people to temporarily live? And we think about this, how we would set up something where you've got structures that are either vinyl, or maybe they're built out of concrete, steel, and glass. They are safe houses. And then people arrive at your compound and you give them like the Karen Silkwood treatment. You blast them with fire hoses. You give them brand new organic clothing and allow them to kind of cleanse their brain and try and figure out how they can deal with this. I think it really represents opportunities for entrepreneurs to come up with ways to slowly but surely fix this for people. Because again, it is so. How many women struggle with infertility, and everybody looks at them like, why, and they spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on fertility treatments. Children who are sick, eczema, skin issues, gut issues. And everybody's swallowing their pharmaceuticals for their gut. When I met my wife in 2005, she's like, it's all about the gut, all about the gut. I'm like, what does the gut have to do with the heart? I'm a cardiologist. I spent all these years in medical training. But what does the gut have to do? Can you imagine that, Dr. Peter, that the medical doctors like me think that? What does your gut have to do with your heart? They're two totally separate body parts. Like that is the mindset and the mentality of people. And yeah, it's tough. It's big. But listen, doctors like you and I are very understanding, to these people, the gravitas of what it is. It'd be a lot easier to say, hey, take this pharmaceutical, or hey, take this supplement. It's just not that easy.
Yeah, and I would even say that, with the mold cases I see, they're in my office because they've already gone through the pharmaceutical realm, right? I mean, usually, I'm sure you probably see it similarly. People don't come to us first. They come to us usually after they've gone through kind of a mainstream route and tried, whatever immunosuppressants or anti-inflammatories or antihistamines to navigate their symptom profile. And what they've found is that those drug treatments are lacking, and their quality of life is still deteriorating at breakneck speed. And so now they're just looking for, they're looking for a real solution beyond those things. And that's usually where I get them, right? And so then from there, it becomes more of a motivation, right? Because you can take somebody who feels relatively well, maybe they're living and being exposed to some mold, but it doesn't destroy the quality of their life to such a degree that they're motivated to spend a bunch of money trying to figure that whole thing out, right? But then you have other people whose lives have been destroyed over it. And now they're motivated because they're so sick, they have no functionality. They can't get up, they can't think, they're brain fogged to the point of almost dementia. I know with my wife, I had to finish her sentences.
Yeah.
It was bad. And she, she's physically fit. She's in good shape. She was a CrossFitter, and now she's on the couch every day and she can't think and can't finish her sentences, and she's thinking about suicide. That's to the extent that some people go, right? But so to me, it's the fundamental problem is one, if we can get enough people on board to understand the scope of it, two, then we can impact meaningful change hopefully within the laws, within the way houses are built. For you to have your cardiology license, or just to have your license, period, you have to meet a standard, right? There's a standard, a minimum standard, and the same thing goes for me. The same thing goes if you have an electrician, there's a minimum standard. A plumber, there's a minimum standard. For builders, there's no minimum standards. There's no licensure that they need. I mean, they have to hire subcontractors that need a license. Like, again, plumbers and electricians need a license, but framers don't need a license. Brickers don't need a license, right? The people that are putting your house up, there's no licensing structure, there's no oversight, and there's no standard of expertise, right, within the industry. And it's all about speed. How fast can we build it? How much can we sell it for? How cheap can we pay for the labor so that we can profit the most? And I really feel like the core of the problem is there. The core of the problem is within the building industry, within the lack of regulation. Not that I want more government regulation, don't get me wrong. I'm not advocating that the government should control everything, because certainly they've not done a great job on many aspects, but some standard is better than zero standard. And I think you also really should, the consideration around insurance, like insurance coverage, because if insurance companies have to pay for it, then they're going to demand that the builders do it better, right? And so everybody wins. At the end of the day, you get a better house that's built, it's better constructed, with the right kinds of materials, with the right kind of expertise, to be as preventative as possible, so that insurance companies don't have to come out and pay big settlements for shoddy construction work. But
I know. Yeah, I mean, totally agree on all of those fronts. And I think really, as far as, how do we build with, materials that are not wood is what it is. I mean, I think that, wood is such a it's so prone, to damage. It becomes impossible to build with wood. All plumbing, all pipes, should be exposed. I think there's a lot of things that we can look at to mitigate that and to lower that down. Let me ask you this. I mean, you do a lot of second opinion consultations after they've seen the medical doctors. What about after they've seen the natural doctors? They've seen the natural doctors, and the natural doctor either didn't mention mold, bacterial, water damage at all, or they kind of gave it like this passing, kind of thing. And then you and I come along and like, no, we don't have to talk about diet again, right? I mean, we've talked about diet a gazillion times. We all know that sleep and sunshine and physical activity is good, right? We all, we know that plastic is bad. We know that EMF and, is bad. We know all of this, but having this kind of front and center conversation of, hey, I've got this epiphany moment for it. But why do you think again, the natural docs are missing this one too?
Because it's a hard conversation. For me, I was, 6 years ago, I was contemplating retirement because of this. Like, for me, it was, oh, please, Lord, quit sending chronic mold cases to me. Because what you said earlier, the husband's, sitting over here with his, because he goes to work for 16 hours a day and the wife usually stays home. She's definitely the canary. The kids are the canaries. The pets are the canaries. And so what you end up getting is you have to build a very objective data set for that woman, typically woman, not always, but typically, to save her life. So like, that's heavy. As a doctor, my job is to help save that person's life, right? And in order to do that, I have to be very, very extremely serious and very meticulous and detail oriented. And so I would be the one, after, again, many other doctors, that would explore those other potential possibilities and demand, well, I would demand excellence of myself, but I would demand excellence for the person to pursue the cause, right? Because I can do tests to identify known mold exposure, but I can't force somebody's hand to go and get a good mold inspector, or to move, or whatever that might look like. I can only give them the data, and then they have to act on the data, right? You take a horse to the water, but you can't make them drink, and that ultimately, that's all of our free will. And I respect that. I respect anybody's decision to do with their life what they want, but it's heavy for me because I take it home. Most good healers are empathetic and they take it home with them. It's heavy on their mind. They're thinking about that person. Are they getting out of that mold? Are they not getting out of that mold? So for me, it was, oh, I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to carry that burden anymore. And it was shortly after that, Jack, that we found mold in my house. And then that changed that, that just turned my whole course in a different direction, because I knew going through it personally, just how expensive and how struggling it is, because you aren't thinking clearly. You're not your best self. You're not your most energetic and brain aware self because of the mold. So going through it just made me realize I can't abandon all these other people because of my own selfish, desire to not have to deal with this problem. This problem isn't going to go away. And I believe it is the epidemic that we're facing in society because, well, I mean, we have a lot of epidemics on the food front, but most people, as you said, we've talked about food. We can eat organic, we can go grain free, we can do the things that are necessary around diet. But if you're still sick because your air is poisoning you to death, and you have to address it, and that's the only way around it. And the only way you're going to address it is if you have enough of an objective trail of data that says, okay, I can believe what this doctor's saying. I need to take action on it. But I think a lot of natural docs don't want to have that conversation. It's a hard conversation to have. It's very stressful to talk to. You're talking to a family, and half the family thinks you're crazy, and they also think that the sick person might be crazy, right? And you have to advocate for that sick person. And that is just tough. It's not poor me. That's not what I'm saying, but you get what I'm saying. It's just a hard thing to do. Oh, I lost your audio.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to tell someone to avoid gluten, for example, and like it's a lot easier to avoid that than these other conversations. But also, it's like as you speak to the other, practitioners, and some of these different events that you and I go to, we're speaking to, we're talking about mold, and they're in denial because they live in it. They live in it, and they're struggling. And there's so many, again, from that, it becomes very difficult, and it can be frustrating again as the provider talking to these people. Plus, you're trying to, your own health that you're trying to recover from, the damage, that happened, regarding your wife. You're trying to support her. You're trying to support your kids. I definitely empathize with you as far as how difficult it can be. And again, I'm having these conversations, where I'm talking to patients. I may be in my Sprinter van. I may be outside of a cafe. I'm doing a webinar, and there's birds chirping in the background because I'm outside. Because again, we're just determined not to live in mold. Real quick, we bought a brand new house from a well-known national builder down in Arizona a couple of years ago, and we closed on the house. And my wife didn't, she walks into the laundry room after the closing, and she's like, I don't feel well in this room. Something's the matter. So we called them over. They took a look. Nothing's the matter, with it. 2 days later, we start using the washing machine, and then there is a leak coming from under the drywall into that area. My wife was able to detect it. We were in a brand new house in Costa Rica, which may not be surprising necessarily for Costa Rica, but it just kind of goes, where how people can use their gut to feel this. There was one particular part of the house we were staying in, brand new house, gorgeous house. And my wife's like, I don't feel well, something's the matter with this wall. We told the owners about it. They live right next door. They built the exact same house. So they built two of them. We were staying, they turned one into an Airbnb. The other was theirs. And then the rains come into Costa Rica, and there's water streaming down the wall that my wife said was the problem area. Peter, I've got so many stories like that. And again, it's kind of a blessing and a curse, no doubt, because the blessing is the sense of you get the warning signs of that, where you're like, okay, I know the warning sign now. I'm never going to live in it. But the problem is now it's so bad, and every house is so affected. That's why, again, I consider myself the world's greatest preventive cardiologist. And I live in a, $500 tent from North Face. We have inflatable mattresses that are eco-friendly, that have no, forever chemicals, to the best of our ability with that. It's impossible there. You can actually buy organic latex rubber toppers on Amazon, like a 3-inch topper that's a twin size. Those are easily mobile. The key to tent camping, though, especially if you do it for a duration, is you got to lift up the tent because moisture collects under the tent. So you have to lift up the mattress. You have to lift up the tent on its side. It's forever a learning process. But, again, I saw my father sick and die at the age of 63. It's very motivational for that not to be me.
Yeah, yeah, I think I agree. To me, if you don't have your health, it doesn't matter. Everything else is irrelevant. And if your family doesn't have their health and you're suffering from their suffering, and nothing matters. Nothing else is really important when that's going on. So I'm more of an absolutist. If I have a problem, I'm going to get out of that problem. When we recovered, we moved into a hotel for 2 months, and it was only while we were trying to fix, because we live on a farm, so we couldn't leave our animals. So we had to try to figure out a way to not, live on our property, but not live in that mold box. And
Yeah.
so 5 miles down the road, there's an extended stay hotel. We kind of recovered partially in that. It was less moldy, probably had some mold in it. It was, not perfect, but it was so much better that the lights turned back on in my wife's brain. So, I mean,
Yeah.
we knew that the exposure was far less there than it was where we were at. And then from there, it was a mobile home, built inside indoors inside of a factory. So we knew at least didn't have any water damage from the build, and dry materials were used. But that was our short-term solution. Was it ideal? No. Was it frustrating? Yes. Is it the way we wanted to live? No. But to me, did health return? Yes. So ultimately, it doesn't matter to me. Home is your family, and if your family's not there, not present, and sick, then it doesn't matter what you live in or where you live and what kind of material possessions that you're nervous about walking away from. I mean, to me, all that's very easy at this point. It gave me a very different perspective on life for sure.
Yeah, and a lot of people would say, "Oh, well, listen, Peter, Jack, you guys are, successful doctors. You make plenty of money and stuff like that." But the reality is that pretty much anybody can, you can use a website like HipCamp. You can go boondock on somebody's property, maybe a friend's property. You can ask your friends on Facebook. You can go to national parks. And you can tent camp, and frankly, it's very cheap to do so. I mean, you think about what I could be paying in a mortgage right now. I'm just on somebody's property in Sandpoint, Idaho, and uh, um, if you and your wife accept, the kids will go along with it. The kids don't care. The kids think it's the greatest time ever. We have 7 and 4-year-old daughters. They could care less. Like you said, home is where, is where the heart is, where the family is. It's not the actual structure. The home is your family unit, and the kids don't care. I have a 13-year-old son. He kind of struggles with a little bit because he would like to have a closet back, right? He would actually have his closet where he knows where his mountain biking gear is, and he knows where, his pajamas are, as opposed to living out of duffel bags. Our actually now 18-year-old, his company is called We're Outside, that he's building, and it's about getting kids out of tech, and out of the classroom and getting them back into the outdoors. He knows what it's like because he is a canary in the coal mine as well. He feels lousy when he is in these damaged structures, so he gets it, fully. So it's been an experience. I believe undoubtedly God put us on this journey in order to be able to wake up other people. How many people are, I mean, kids with ear infections, throat infections, the doctors remove the tonsils, the adenoids. You mentioned, people who are crazy. Yeah, there's a lot of crazy freaking people out there. And the answer is not Prozac. The answer is to figure out why they're crazy. It's like crazy. If we say that that's a diagnosis, then it behooves us to figure out why they are crazy. Why are they struggling with anxiety, fear, worry, depression, suicidal ideations, all these different things? Why are they crazy? It's not because they've got a genetic they don't have the crazy gene. There is no crazy gene. It's all because of these environmental toxins and pollutants that destroy our brain, this neuroinflammation. And every neurologist knows about neuroinflammation. They just don't have a clue as to why. And that's where, professionals like you and I come in. So again, thank you.
Yeah, likewise. What else can you add? I mean, what any other things that you feel like we haven't discussed or touched on that you feel like would be super helpful for people to walk away from this conversation, understanding that might help them on their journey out of mold?
Well, again, like, been there, done that, continue to talk to people. I think in a lot of situations, in things, I'll speak for myself. I've said a lot of things over the years that have led to a lot of marital relationship issues. Things that we've said that have led to divorce amongst people. And again, maybe it was an unshaky marriage and, it was not a faith-based, faith-centered marriage, of course, in these situations. But for these people who are out there, specifically all the women who are out there are people there who understand this, that get this, that can help you with this, whether it's Dr. Osborne, myself, or many, many, many others, who can help in this arena. There's tons of Facebook groups, right? I mean, you get into some of these like toxic mold support groups, Peter, and you see like hundreds of thousands of people in there, and half of them are women who want to kill themselves. Like, I mean, this is a serious, and you can see the stories about how it led to, family issues, work-related issues. How many people work in mold, in moldy buildings, moldy offices, moldy structures, cars, all these things. So again, I think that there are a lot of people who can help support, other biohacking strategies, that can help. I think that whether it's, sauna, red light therapy, ozone, hyperbaric, maybe even things like tissue plasma exchange or plasmapheresis can provide people some benefits there. Just anything that helps to replace the cell membrane, all the components of that. And I believe, again, the best food for that is eating fish. If you're a shellfish eater, great. If you're not a shellfish eater and you just will eat fish, you got to eat the fish. All that is, loaded with phosphatidylcholine, and that is the main components of cell membranes. Of course, cholesterol is a major component of the cell membrane, so we want to feed ourselves cholesterol-rich foods in order to replenish, that cell membrane. There's some supplements in that arena that could be helpful. I don't know if you, have thoughts on, one product in particular is Body Bio's PC. It's a glass bottled product. They're phosphatidylcholine. There's also IV phosphatidylcholine. A lot of these are soy-derived, non-GMO soy. There's a lot of consternation about that as well. But I think that's, kind of, replacing those old, damaged, oxidized cell membranes would be helpful. As well. And then we talked about some of the binders in that arena, but just understanding you will not get healthy in the same environment where you got sick. I talked about that, the truth about cancer in 2016. You cannot heal in the same environment where you got sick. You have to change up the environment. Again, it's a long road, but it is a road nonetheless.
Do you have any opinions on the popularity of people going carnivore? What I have personally seen in my own practice is every person that did super well with carnivore was in mold. And when we get them out of mold, they can start reintroducing foods again. But have you had any experience with the carnivore diet helping people at all?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I think it's probably easiest on the person with that intestinal hyperpermeability or leaky gut because you're not getting a lot of those undigested food proteins maybe coming in that relies on, and also, listen, mold is a hepatotoxin. And if you damage your liver, all bets are off. It leads to abnormal lipids, inflammation, oxidative stress. When you damage the liver, it no longer produces LDL receptors to clear out old LDL oxidized particles. You develop disease from that. So, we do find that in that sense of as we go to something like carnivore, again, you're providing some of the most nutrient dense foods in the world. I think where a lot of carnivore people fail is they don't eat seafood. I think that's a major mistake. I think seafood is the healthiest food on the planet. People with the highest levels of omega-3 fatty acids in their blood have the longevity, have the vitality, lowest risk of heart attack, stroke, AFib, cancer, dementia, you name it. So eating seafood, I think, is always a good strategy. But listen, my book is the paleo cardiologist, right? So I'm the paleo guy. I'm not the carnivore guy. I'm not the keto guy. I think carnivore can help you with a short-term improvement, but I don't personally think that for the majority of people, it's the long-term strategy, only because our ancestors were not obligate carnivores. Certainly carnivore is a lot cleaner than the vast majority of diets that people are consuming. So.
I agree with you. I don't think it's a long-term solution. I have a theory that when people cut out plant-based foods, a lot of what they're really doing is going grain-free, because a lot of people they don't go gluten-free and then go carnivore. They just go from a standard American diet to carnivore, and so they're actually a lot of the benefits they're reaping are just gluten grain-free changes. They're trying to eat more organic and less chemicals. But I also believe that a lot of the plant-based foods are contaminated with mold because of the way we farm. And so mold and mycotoxins are very heavily present. And I think 30% of the grain crop in the world is contaminated with mold, probably higher than that, but that was a recent estimate. I know we have problems the way we feed animals conventionally with tons of grain. Like when you eat conventional animal meat, there's a greater risk of mycotoxin exposure through the meat. And so if you're eating, fresh, non-farm raised, grass-fed, grass-finished, or wild caught, you're reducing the potential for mycotoxin exposure. And I've just seen cases where people are so hypersensitized, like when we do their food testing. I don't know if you've seen this trend, but people that are in mold oftentimes will light up an IgE test. Like they're going to have 10 or more, acute IgE responses to foods. They're going to have a lot more delayed responses to foods. And so going carnivore for a lot of those people, it's like an elimination diet of sorts. That's just been my experience, but I agree. I don't think it's a long-term solution. I think ultimately you've got to be able to eat with the season and eat what is good and what is healthy and what we can get. But to restrict to just that, I think ultimately we see a lot of deficiency in those people too when we test them, like 10 or more vitamin and mineral deficiencies on testing when they've been on carnivore long term.
Yeah, I think, to your point too, when you grain feed the animals, there's so many problems with that, but that's where a lot of the data on the binders comes from, that the binders are effective because the ranchers are not going to turn. I don't want to say that they're ranchers. I mean, obviously they run those who run the factory farms, they know how deleterious it is. They're not going to turn those cows out to pasture. They're just going to try binders, and that's where some of the data on the binders comes from, to bind up some of those toxins. But for some of these people that, again, like, you run some of these food panels and they're sensitive just about everything. It's just their gut is a total sieve. And I think it's a lot of it is starting from all those things that damage the gut microbiome. And I think also the mold is stronger than it was in the days of the biblical authors, right? The mold is just, it's advanced. It's learned how to survive. And maybe it releases more toxins than ever because of the EMF, because of all the other environmental things that the mold is exposed to as well. That the mold changes and morphs and gets worse over time is also a factor. But I mean, there's really so much to discover in this. I mean, listen, just spend more time outside, even if you live in, like you said, the mold box.
Well, this has been a great conversation. I appreciate you taking time out of your tent to come and join me.
No, it's a pleasure, and I appreciate you having me on. And again, God put people like you and I on this journey, and our families on this journey, in order to share this message. For so many people who just don't have the answers, they're just sitting there, and no one listens to them. They don't know why they're sick. They're being medicated to death. They're being surgically chopped up, to death. I did a social media post yesterday condemning mammograms and the fact that mammograms, according to their literature, save like 1 out of 2,000 lives. So 2,000 women get a mammogram every 2 years for 10 years. It prevents one person from dying. That's according to their literature. And we need to focus on, why do women get breast cancer? And I think, again, cancer is because we are immunosuppressed. Why are we immunosuppressed? Well, one of the most famous immunosuppressants from a pharmacological standpoint is a pharmaceutical called Cellcept, Cellcept. And Cellcept we give to people who get an organ transplant. You get a new liver, a new heart, new kidney. We give you something to suppress your immune system so your immune system doesn't attack the new organ. What is Cellcept? It is only mycophenolic acid in a capsule. So pharma knows how powerful it is. They put it in a capsule. And we can test people's mycophenolic acid levels in their urine, and a lot of people come up elevated. So if you're living in a home of water damaged mold, secreting mycophenolic acid, it's getting into your system. What do you think it's doing to your immune system? So crazy. Crazy, scary, the whole thing. But and now when you have immunosuppression, now you develop COVID, now you develop infections, now you develop cancer, because your immune system does not go on to surveil the maybe spontaneous mutations, or toxin-induced mutations in our DNA, in our ability to police our bodies. And this immunodysfunction is really just key. And what's main driving factor of immunodysfunction is living in water damaged mold and bacteria.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Dr. Jack, appreciate you. It's been a great conversation. I hope
Thank you, my friend.
Your family do well and get to Costa Rica and get that new place going, mold free and mold proof as much as you can.
Will do. Thank you.
Yep. Take care.
Thanks for tuning in to the Dr. Osborne Zone. Don't forget to share, like, and subscribe for more content like this, and make sure you come back next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time and Thursday at noon 30 for more episodes.